Welcome back to Grace Baptist Church. Today we're looking at Hebrews 2:11 through 15. So today's going to be a little bit different. We're going to read our verses, and then I have an object lesson set up. So we'll run through that without any commentary. Then we'll look at the verses. Then we'll go back to the object lesson to see what sort of application we can make. So Hebrews 2, we'll start in verse 11. I'll read, then if we could go around the room reading verse by verse. Hebrews 2:11. For both he that sanctifieth and they who are sanctified are all of one, for which cause he is not ashamed to call them brethren.
Saying, I will declare thy name unto my brethren. In the midst of the church will I sing praise unto thee.
And again I will put my trust in him, and again, behold, I and the children which God hath given me.
Forasmuch then as the children are partakers of flesh and blood, he also himself likewise took part of the same, that through death he might destroy him that had the power of death, that is, the devil.
And deliver them which through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage.
All right. So, like I promised, object lesson at the very beginning. Do you know what this is? Yes or no? Sam knows. I told him. So this is an espresso machine. This is a very old style of espresso machine where you make the coffee by pouring the water in the top, pressing the lever down. So today for our object lesson, we are going to be making an Americano. So, first of all, does anyone know what an Americano is in terms of coffee? Very good. All right.
Diluted.
What?
Diluted.
It's okay. It's diluted. So it is diluted with what?
Water.
Water. Okay. So most of an Americano is water. What's the rest of it?
Coffee.
Regular coffee? Strong coffee?
Espresso.
Espresso. Yep. And that's going to be our Americano. We're going to put it in this little glass here with one shot of espresso. So I ground up some coffee beans last night. You can see they are definitely not liquid. They're very solid. So I start by putting the coffee into this little basket, which is called a portafilter, because it's a filter and you can move it. Hence porta. So I'm going to put in a lot of grounds because we want a very strong shot, because there's going to be lots of water. Then, when I'm finished mounting it up, I take this thing called a tamper and I press down on top of the coffee to make it flat. This helps when I make the coffee so that all the right flavors come out. So, very flat. Now I'm going to put this into my machine. Come on, buddy. Of course. It knows it's on camera. There we go. So now the coffee part is ready. We're going to put the cup under there, and we're going to get the water. So this has been heating up in the back. So what I do first is I pour it into the top of the coffee machine here. You can see it steaming. Then I do this to let the water down into the chamber. I press down at regular pressure. This is normal atmosphere pressure for about 10 seconds until it starts to drip. It gets pretty close. And then I raise it up 2 times pressure, 3 times pressure, 5 times pressure. 9 times the normal pressure that you would get from the atmosphere. Hold for about 30 seconds. Ease up a little bit. And you have your espresso. Then, to finish off the Americano, we take the water and we pour in just enough to dilute it. So, who wants a free Americano? Anybody? You want an Americano? Is that okay?
No.
No, not okay? Okay. Parental veto. No. Anybody else? There's probably cream and sugar down in the kitchen.
And ice.
And ice? Oh, yeah, that's right. It's a hot day. So, we'll just leave the Americano there. Make me very, very upset. Then we push the rest of the water out of the machine to reset it for next time. Stop that up. We're ready to go. Now we're going to move into part 2, which is where we're talking about these verses. Part 3 will connect the two. Starting with Hebrews 2:11, talking about how Jesus and we relate. Remember last week we talked about how Jesus became like us, how Jesus changed to be like us. The problem of the world. God gave the world to people, people gave it up to Satan. And now we have an issue. The world God wants us to have isn't ours. So he came to the world to fix it and to bring it back to us. And then we see in verse 11 how he did that. For both he that sanctifieth and they who are sanctified are all of one, for which cause he is not ashamed to call them brethren. So, question time. Who are the people who are sanctified? Who is that?
The saints.
The saints. So that's us. We are the people who are sanctified. Jesus is the one who sanctifies. And what the Bible says is we are one. There is no Jesus and us. We are rolled together. We are mixed together. We are part of the unit. We are the sons of God. Jesus is the firstborn son. Jesus is the only begotten son. But we are all still sons of God. He is one with us. Because of that, Jesus does a lot of things for us, and we get a lot of things from him. First of all, he calls us brothers. He's not ashamed to call us brothers. Back in Israel, there were times when Jesus would be teaching, and people would following him so densely that others couldn't get to it. There was one time, I think it's in Luke 8, where Jesus, his parents and family tried to come talk to him. This was early in his ministry. Everybody was still confused. They think, this guy is just another crazy person. We know his family. We married his sisters. This guy can't be the prophet we're talking about. So his family is coming to talk to him about this sudden urge to claim to be the Son of God. And they're standing outside the house. Now, that's probably a good thing. In this culture, if you wanted to make a scene, you walk right up to somebody and talk to them. If you wanted to do things the nice way, the polite way, you pulled them to the side and talked to them by themselves. So his family were standing outside. They were being really nice. They were being really polite about it, but they wanted to talk to Jesus. Say, hey, we're your family. We know who you are, and we're not entirely sure that you're this God you claim to be. We see that with a lot of Jesus' family, even James, who wrote the book of James. We see from church legend, he did not believe on Jesus until after Jesus rose from the dead. There were many others who likewise did not believe on Jesus in that time. His family is standing outside the house, trying to talk him out of this whole Messiah thing. He's inside the house doing the whole Messiah thing. And when people say, hey, your family's out there, they want to talk to you, Jesus said, who are my family? He says, look around you. See these people who are listening to me? This is my mother and my brothers and my family. He says, I claim these people as my family. My followers are my family. So that is what Jesus is not ashamed to do. He's not ashamed to look at each one of you and call you his relation. He says, I came to earth as a person so I could be with you and be connected to you. Not just person and person, family. Like we were talking about before, we're all related. He's also the eldest son. That was also something very important back then, because the eldest son's job was to take care of the family. Well, first of all, it's the father that took care of the family. The father had all the money, the father had all the stuff, and he took care of all his kids. But eventually, the father would get old. The father wouldn't be able to do what he usually did. So then the role passed to the eldest son. You remember the story of Joseph? How the son, the best son, the eldest son, got 2 times what everybody else got? That's not an accident. The eldest son was expected to give stuff to every single child. He was expected to help every single child. So he got twice as much stuff because he was expected to give away almost all of it in order to maintain the family and in order to be the new leader of the clan. That's the position God says Jesus has. Jesus is the only begotten. We see later he is the firstborn of many brethren. So we're all part of that family. We are all under Jesus, with Jesus. But he's the one who got God's power. He then gives it to us. He's the one who saved us. It trickles down to us. He's the one who lived righteously. That trickles down to us. Everything we get comes through the pipe of Jesus. And it's because he came to earth and joined himself to us that we have that access. He's even more. We see that later on. He's also a high priest. So not only do God's blessings come to us, but our thanks go back to God through Jesus. Jesus is the important middle. Without him, there's a wall between us and God. But he came, he became us, he brought us into his family so that things could flow both ways. That's why it's important that he calls us brothers, because he is the eldest son. We are family with him. Now, there are some things you do for family you don't do for other people. There are some feelings you have for family that you don't have for other people. Sometimes you're annoyed. Sometimes you're angry. Sometimes you're very protective. Of course, you have the idea of the older brothers protecting the little sister. She can never bring a boy home because the older brothers would just beat him up and laugh about it. We do that in my family. We tease our little sisters all the time. It's fun. But there's that normal protectiveness, that idea that I am going to watch out for you. If somebody wants to hurt you, I stand in the way. Nobody picks on my little brother but me. In the same way, we have a family bond with Christ, and we have feelings that work within that family. The Bible talks about this idea, bowels of compassion, is how it is in the KJV. Bowels are your inner organs, like your heart, your guts. In English, we have the phrase, the gut feeling. It's just something we feel really deep inside us. That's the feeling the Bible's talking about. This care for people that sits inside you and wells up through you and changes how you act. This is something that Paul describes belonging to the church. He says, love each other. You should have this feeling, this deep drive inside you that leads you to help other believers, leads you to care. And like any family, we can get annoyed. We can upset each other. The Corinthians were great at this. They were great at fighting about just about everything. And so Paul had to send them letter after letter in order to make sure they weren't fighting anymore and they were focusing on what the family needs to do, which is follow God through Jesus. There's also, on top of that, a responsibility. If there's a son who is going out doing things that the family doesn't like, somebody goes and talks to him. Somebody says, hey, you're ruining the family name. We are Smiths, and every single Smith so far has been a good person. But you went to school, you're causing fights, you're picking bad friends, you're going wrong places. That's not what a Smith does. In the same way, not only do we associate ourselves with the believers, but when we see a believer who's going away, we have the job to go and talk to them. Now, this is not what many churches do. Many times if somebody leaves, they push them further away. You're living in sin. You're not perfect. You can't be a Christian anymore until you fix yourself and come back. That's not how the church is built. The church is not built of perfect people. That's not the way people are. There are no perfect people. The church is built of lots of people broken in so many different ways. They all need Christ. And they're designed to help each other come back. The Bible talks about how God sometimes gives up people to their lusts. We talk about that with Pharaoh when we were looking at Exodus these last couple weeks. He just gives Pharaoh up. He says, Pharaoh, you're going to harden your heart. Go ahead. You'll notice the Bible never says people can do that. That's God's job. That's not people's job. It's people's job to love the family and to invite them back to the group, back to be with Christ. That's what it means to be brothers with Christ. That's what it means to be fellows with each other. So, the next part that Jesus says, moving on to verse 12, says, I will declare thy name unto my brethren. In the midst of the church will I sing praise unto thee. Now, both of these are references back to Psalms. The Hebrews absolutely loves to look back at Psalms and talk about Psalms. So this first part, singing praise with the church, is actually a different word in the Old Testament. It's in the middle of the congregation, in the middle of the group, I will sing praise to God. This is a promise that David made. When Jesus copies this promise, Jesus says, in the middle of our group, I will sing praise to God. So we are with God, we are with Jesus. And Jesus is glorifying God. So not only we can look at him, we can see him doing it. But Jesus is not glorifying God by himself. Jesus is bringing many sons to glory, bringing many people to him. He is in the midst of the group. He's in the head of the pack. He is the leader of a large choir, and we are joining him. That's why we're there. That's why it feels right when we join with other believers to worship. And that's why it feels wrong when we're not worshiping. A believer has the unique ability to always know when they're sinning, because when they talk to God about it, God tells them. We can feel far more guilty than the world ever can, because we know what it's like to be saved. We know what it's like to be free. So when sin comes again and pulls us down, we know. That's why it feels wrong. Because we're not built to be living quiet. We're built to be singing with Jesus. We're built to be joining him and joining each other in glorifying God. That's why it's important that Jesus sings in the midst of the group. The next part, he says, Behold, I and the children which God hath given me. This is very similar to that earlier thing we talked about, how Jesus is part of the brethren. Jesus is the leader of the many, many children. And he's the one who helps them. Jesus also talks about how he's a shepherd, how he guides the little children. He says, if you come to me, you have to have faith like a little child. You have to come to me. You have to agree. You can do nothing. You need everything. Like a little toddler cannot make food. A little they just know when they're hungry. And so they come to somebody who can make food, and they complain. And then the parent gives them food, they run away and get hungry again. They get hurt. What do? They run to mom. They break something. What do? They run to dad. Every problem in their life has to be fixed by somebody better than them, somebody who knows more about life. And that is exactly how we should act in our lives. We can't feed ourselves spiritually. We need God to feed us. We need him to lead us to the right pasture, and then we eat. We need him to take us by clean water so that we can drink. We need him to guide us along every step of the way, telling us when to stop, telling us when to go. That's how much we need God. But that is the exact relationship that he describes. He's the shepherd. He's the father of the children. He is the leader. And not just the leader. He's the guide. He's with you. He's not standing far away telling you where to go. He's sitting right beside you, steering you. And it takes a lot of presumption and a lot of pride to look at the God who's standing right next to you, who could be in heaven, far away, not caring, and telling him you want to go the one way he says not to go. The next thing that Jesus says, verse 13, and again, I will put my trust in him. And again, behold, I and the children which God hath given me. We already looked at the children part, but the trust part. I was looking at a commentary here from Matthew Henry, a man who lived in the 1600s in England. And he made this interesting note. He says, the fact that Jesus says he puts his trust in God, that means he becomes like man. The nature of man is to trust God. We just talked about that. We need God. We rely on God. Jesus already had him. Jesus was far above everybody else. Jesus was perfect. Jesus made everything. He doesn't need anything. But he changed himself. He became a man. He became needy to where he needed God for every little bit of everything. He trusted God, just like we need to do. He lived through exactly what we lived through because he became like us, so we could be like him. The next part, verse 14. For as much then as the children are partakers of flesh and blood, he also himself likewise took part of the same, that through death he might destroy him that hath the power of death, that is the devil. So we have bodies. Very beginning, God did not have a body. Jesus did not have a body. He was very much above us. He is a spirit. He can do anything. He is not kept under the laws of our physical world. But he didn't stay like that. We have a body. We have blood. He chose a body. He chose blood. He chose a body so it could be broken. He chose blood so it could be spilled. And he chose earth because that's the people he wanted to save. Jesus is very much like us in how he lives. He's also very different. He's like us in that his body was like ours. His life was like ours. He experienced everything we did. And his death was like ours. He died just like any person would. That's where the resemblance stops. Because his power was unlike ours. The fact that he obeyed God perfectly, he did exactly what a man was supposed to do in life. His power was very much greater than anything we ever have. He had God's salvation working in him every single second of his existence. We had none of it. And we can't get it. We need him to be with us. He also had freedom unlike ours. When we get a choice, whether before we're saved, the world says you can sin. We say, okay. Now we might pick the sin. We might pick the sin of being lazy and staying home. Or we might pick the sin of being lazy watching TV. We can pick the sin of pride and study because we want people to notice us. We can pick the sin of pride and study because we want to feel good. We can pick the sin of being an atheist because we want to hate God. We can pick the sin of being a Muslim because we want to love the wrong God. We have all the options for sin and none of the options for righteousness. We are slaves to doing wrong. Jesus never had that problem. Jesus could eat with publicans and sinners because he was not tempted to be a thief or a harlot. Jesus could eat with the Pharisees because he was not tempted to be proud. Jesus could stand in the middle of the desert being tempted by Satan to do something simple.
I have a question about that statement.
What statement? Oh, later?
Yes, so I don't need to forget.
Oh, okay.
Say it.
Okay. Jesus was in the middle of the wilderness. Seems pretty simple to turn stones into bread, right? Why is that a sin? Why is that wrong? God didn't give him the bread. And God didn't tell him to turn the stones into bread. If God didn't say to do it, don't do it. Jesus already knew that. Jesus knew how easy it was to fall into sin, but he didn't want it. Because he didn't want anything unless God wanted it for him. This is a freedom. He lives knowing the next minute, God takes care of it. Food, God takes care of it. Life, God takes care of it. Death, God takes care of it. It's hard to accept sometimes. Sometimes what God wants seems like it's not the best. But living, trusting God, always results in great blessing. Not just in the future. Remember how Jesus said, "You are my father, you are my mother, you are my brothers, you are my family, if you follow me." He also gave a promise. He said, you're going to have to give up your earthly family. You're going to have to give up your brothers. You're going to have to give up your mother. You're going to have to give up your sisters because you need to love me more. But he made a promise. Mark 10, 29 and 30. He said, if you do give up mother, brother, sisters, riches, you'll get more in this life. You will receive mothers, brothers, houses, possessions in this life with persecution, and then life everlasting. God does not leave all of his promises for eternity. He's not a God of the afterlife. He's a God of the now. He's a God of today, God of every single minute. We don't need God just to go to heaven. We need God to take our next breath. We need God to know how to exist. That's why we're built. That's how people exist. So all of this coming back together. Going to look at our object lesson again. So I'm going to need a trash can. I believe there's one in here. Yep, here it is. So, there's our trash can. Nobody wants the Americano? Okay.
You're not going to drink it?
No, I have a coffee limit. I would exceed my coffee limit for this part of the day. Plus, I'm making another one. That one's fresher. So, once again, we start with something that is coffee. Is this liquid or solid? What is it? Can you drink this? Yes or no? No, you can't. Very good. This is Jesus before he came to earth. Something unlike us. Something without a body, without blood, but something with a very strong flavor. Something that we will never have. So, he comes to this world, placed in a nice, neat little package. A baby. And he's going to be put ready to be made like us. So we're going to heat up the water again. So right now, Jesus has a lot of power, a lot of flavor, but he's not like us. He can't be joined with us. He's still very different. But there's a process that's going to change that. And this is what Jesus did to help us, to be like us. The water is us. No flavor, just lots of heat. No amount of heating up the water is going to make it change flavor. I'm not going to magically pour it out. Whoa, it's coffee now. Something as we, just like we, cannot be like Christ on our own. we need him to be part of us. We need him to be added to us. That kettle is taking a little longer to heat up than I thought it would. Anytime now.
Think so.
Think so? Okay. Yep. Boiling. Good call. All right. Next part. Jesus is made like us. Hot water plus the power he already has. So, start of life seems pretty easy. Exact same amount of pressure that everybody else in the world is getting. That holds for about 30 years. Living a perfectly normal life. But then, drips start to come. He starts to say he's the Messiah, and he starts getting pushback. And it rapidly grows to where the entire world either doesn't understand him or actively fights against him. But God says, stay there, stay under the pressure. And he does. And he stays there until every bit of power and flavor is spent and he dies. But now, he lives. He is like us. This is a liquid now, with lots of flavor. And now, we are in Christ. And he is in us. We are one. So that is how you make an Americano. That is how God makes a Christian. That is who we are. That is the power we have. And that is what we have to be thankful for. So, John, your question now?
My question is, I just asked if I heard it properly. You said
Okay.
Jesus could not have been tempted, right?
Well, he was tempted. Couldn't have sinned. Didn't want to sin. He didn't want to sin.
Okay, so you didn't mean that he could not be
Yeah.
tempted.
Slip of the tongue.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, he obviously was tempted.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
because
laid out in Scripture.
4 verse 15 says he was tempted.
Right, right.
Because if he cannot be tempted,
right. He was
he,
tempted.
he has no right to judge us if we are tempted. He had to be tempted
Right.
and pass the test so we can pass his test.
Yeah.
Thank you. I thought I heard.
Yeah.
you say
Good.
that,
Good
but-
job. Good job.
Yeah. Because
Yeah. I think I did say the wrong
yeah,
word there.
you did the wrong word.
Okay.
That's why I wanted to make sure that.
All right.
Thank you.
Any questions, comments, sarcastic remarks? All right. I think we'll be done for today.